Pedro from A&P-REACTS. I'm here today with Barney Greenway from Napalm Death to talk about Throes of Joy and the Jaws of Defeatism, out September 18th on Century Media Records. How are you doing?
Good, and good afternoon, everybody who may be even vaguely interested in this thing, with me. Yeah.
The first question I have for you is, it's a very interesting title. Where the idea for the album title came from?
Well, it's like in language terms, it's an oxymoron, so it's a positive and a negative in an active sentence, because I'm a nerd like that. I like to use a language. I'm a student of language techniques and stuff. So I like to use a lot of wordplay and things like that as well. So that's the first thing. So there's two other levels of the meaning of it beyond that. So first of all, visually, if you the jaws I referred to are kind of, what I mean by that is kind of a trap, so like a steel trap or something. So you can imagine if you were caught in a steel trap, it'd be, of course, you'd be completely distressed. You'd be trying your hardest to get out of it to the best of your ability. But I wanted to turn it around. I wanted to say, I'm out of this thing. I'm leaving it, and I'm leaving it with a smile on my face, So that's the first thing to say. Then the actual reference points on the album, the actual meaning of the overall album. So when Napalm does when Napalm Death, the lyrical sort of the overall lyrics for an album, for me, it always needs to be something that people can connect with. So it has to be current, in or around the recording, because if it's generic, people don't have something to hook onto, and I want it is my wish that people, at least, I'm going to put the ideas on the table. It's my wish that people would at least chew them over. I don't expect everybody to agree, whatever, but I want the ideas at least to have something to bring people in, So the thing this time around, which kind of I thought really need drawing attention to, was the elevation in dehumanization and discrimination of people, which has always been there, don't get me wrong, but it's gone to a new level at this point, because you have governments around the world now propagating ideas that discriminate. Well, I'll give two examples, So migrants, refugees, coming from, poverty, general desperate situations, or in some cases extreme violence, the way they are treated sometimes, the way they are spoken about as if they're not even the same kind of human as us, and in some cases inhuman. I just find it despicable. You know what I mean? The way that whole conversation goes. The fact that governments are using it now is particularly worrying. I'll take that a little bit further. So the second example is LGBTQ plus people, because again, they've been discriminated against for a long time. There has been some progress in that respect, but right now there are governments across the world that are using very distinct, like, anti-gay propaganda and LGBTQ plus propaganda, and in some cases are actually formulating policies based upon the separation of those people out from the rest of the population. And the thing is, what's so crazy about this whole thing is that these are the same tactics that were used in the 1930s to make the general population push a certain groups of people out, and it led in the end to extreme violence and mass murder. Whole sections of people were just murdered, for no reason at all. And people say, oh yeah, when I talk to people about it, oh yeah, well, it's not going to happen again. Yeah, but it could. These are exactly the same steps, that were going on. So I wanted to draw attention to this stuff, first and foremost. And then secondly, as Napalm Death, of course, we wanted to be the complete antithesis. We simply wanted to stand up and say, this is not acceptable. This is fellow human beings you're talking about, and this is not acceptable, whichever way you slice it, So So that's the general thing with the title, to be honest.
I want to add two things to what you said. When I read the title of the album, when I thought of Jaws, I thought of Jaws from 007, you know, the metal.
And why not? You know, yeah.
That was the first thing that came to my mind. And in terms of what you said, it's very common for us humans not to worry about something until it affects us. So as long as it's happening to other people, it seems to be not even existent until it knocks on our door and they come for us for something that we up until that point didn't think it was even important.
Sure, definitely. You know, and it's the really curious thing about this. I mean, there's probably other examples, but I kind of loathe to use it because it's an obvious one. But you know, the example of neo-fascism, you know, where there are people out there who endorse like fascist ideology, like racial separation and no mixing of the races and stuff like that. But, you know, it's fair to say that there's a significant percentage of those people who, if there ever was a fascist regime in the United States, in the UK, wherever, if their backgrounds were looked into and something was found, they'd be first up against the wall with a bullet in their heads. You know what I mean? This is the thing, you know, I mean, I don't think people realise the realities of those situations, you know, back in the day. I mean, I wasn't living in the 1930s, you know, I wasn't on the streets of Warsaw or Prague, you know, when the Nazis came for them and came for the Jews and put them into ghettos. I wasn't there. But can you imagine, you know what I mean, being in that situation, not knowing whether the next street corner that you turn around, there's going to be some fucking brown shirt waiting there to whisk you off into some fucking rat-infested, typhoid-infested ghetto, you know what I mean?
I think one of the problems with the world now, and I don't want to get too far off from discussing the album, but this has a lot to do with the lyrics and the content on the album, is I'm Portuguese and I didn't live through the fascist regime in Portugal, but my parents did.
Sure. Yeah.
So my parents still had that experience, and they were able to transport that experience and teach us about how hard it was. Like
Sure.
you can listen to music unless it was approved by the government.
Sure.
You know, you can say anything negative towards the government, you would disappear in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
The military police would come in and whisk you away, and nobody would ever find you ever again.
Totally.
So I feel that generation that went through that, at least, and the generation that came after, at least has some connection, and they understand exactly the dangers of that kind of mentality. But there's a lot of people in the world now that they've been so far removed from fascism or communism or any of the isms. It's hard for them to really understand the full consequences of embracing such ideology because they're so far away from it. So all they go by is what they read in books.
Sure.
And in books, it may seem appealing, but when it gets put out in practice, it's not as appealing.
Sure, definitely. I mean, you know, me personally, I see the signs. You know, I can smell these things from a million miles away. You can see the gradual build-up. You know, people that propagate this stuff are very clever. You know, they start with small things that don't seem so heinous. You know, still be heinous to me probably, but you know, they don't seem so bad to the people they're trying to appeal to. You know, and it's like small steps. You know, to the ultimate goal of mass murder, basically. That's what it was, you know. So I mean, yeah, it's totally right what you say, you know. And I mean, I don't want to live like in a world like that, you know, and I don't want my fellow human beings also to have to go through that. So, you know, that's why I'm always very, you know, when I was thinking about the premise of the album, you know, it kind of jumped out at me, you know. I was like, I have to put this on the table, you know. This is really fucking important and in some ways quite urgent, you know. And I know, you know, I'm not naive to think that something like Napalm Death is going to wave a magic wand and the whole thing's going to disappear in a puff of smoke, you know. But at least we're there, you know. At least we're part of the humane opposition, I suppose, you know, for want of a better term, you know. So we're there, you know, and we are focusing on it and we're putting the ideas out there, you know. So.
At least creating discussion, that's for sure. I mean, we're here talking about it, you know, so it's always a positive thing. How do you approach an album like this from a creative perspective? Because I felt like this album had like we were talking about, has a very strong lyrical content, and that translates also into how raw and how aggressive the music is. But how do you guys attack an album like this from a creative process?
Well, the thing is, Pedro, what I always liked about Napalm and being in Napalm is that it's a paradox. You know, it is extremely violent music mixed with the complete opposite. You know what I mean? Peaceful, humane lyrics. You know, so that is a good start point. You know, in terms of the more like specific, like creative stuff, all after 16 albums, the way we look at things is, why repeat yourself? You know, because it's not going to do us any favors, and it's not going to do the people that followed the band, really committed people that have followed the band for years and years and years and years. You know, it's cheating them as well. You know, so we're always taking a couple of steps forward. You know, now as long as the stuff that we do is extreme, sounds obvious, as long as it is abrasive, as long as it is confrontational, you know, all those things mixed together, whatever reference point, whatever color we choose to dip our brush in from the palette of influences, that we've got a very huge palette, you know, then as long as it's those things, then as far as we're concerned, we can't go wrong. You know, we live and die by our own stuff. And, you know, our vision of extremity is not some two-dimensional thing. It's multi-dimensional. You know, we see extremity in things like, you know, the post-punk movement, you know, in the Killing Jokes, in the Gang of Fours, you know, in the Joy Divisions, you know, in the Swans, you know, in all those bands, in the Nick Cave's birthday party, you know, Nick Cave's first band. We see extremity in all that stuff. And so we take it and we just give it a napalm twist, you know, and then, you know, it seems to work out okay, you know. So
this album felt, you talked about influences, and I felt this album had a lot of punk influences into it, in terms of the way the songs were structured, the overall sound, a lot of the aggressive movements in the way the songs move from verses and chorus. There was just a lot of punk influences, but at the same time, it felt very organic.
yeah.
And I'm not saying you guys are a polished band that goes in the studio and tries to tweak on everything. That's really not what Napalm is. But I felt like this album was extra organic, almost like you guys press record, start playing, first take, this is it, we're going with it.
Yeah, there was a lot of that, especially when Shane went in on the first session, which was actually September 2017. He recorded half the songs, basically, just the raw root tracks, you know, and then you kept some stuff that was there. So yeah, it's all we've always had that thing to try and, although the album was recorded over a 3-year period, you got to remember this, it was literally 1 or 2 days, 3 months away from it, come back into the studio. So we still had to be effective with the time that we got, you know, so that's what we did. And I think it worked out all right, you know, so. But
I wanted to ask you about the overall track listing. It's something that perhaps a lot of people don't talk about, but I was really impressed with what you guys did here, because in an album that has this much aggression, there's still a lot of melodic tracks, and there's a lot of out-of-the-box kind of tracks on this album. And I felt that you guys did a wonderful job alternating, spacing everything out so that you don't have this huge surge of heaviness and aggression at the beginning of the album, and then it tempering out all the way as you move towards the end of the record.
Yeah, as I was saying earlier on, we go for a mix, you know. I think also to say that, you know, maybe a few albums ago you would have been able to point at different tracks and go, yeah, well, that track is this style of Napalm, and that track's that style of Napalm, and that track's that style of Napalm. So there's quite a separation. As after 16 albums, you know, and I guess the chemistry between us, we're now to the point where we're amalgamating things better. So it's not a track of 2 influences or 2 styles. It could be multiple influences in one track. So I think when you listen to particularly this album and arguably Apex as well, you see that it's kind of seamless, you know what I mean? And I like that, you know, I like the fact that it's not, that somebody's not going to go, depending upon their taste, oh yeah, well, I really like the first half of the album, but the second album kind of dipped and I kind of turned it off after that. So, you know, I don't think this album gives you that when you listen to it, you know, so I'm pretty satisfied with that. You know?
Yeah, it's very balanced, very cohesive all the way through.
The thing is, though, man, Pedro, I will say this: you don't see what goes on behind the scenes. Me and Shane will toss a track list idea for fucking months. You know what I mean? You know, and the thing is, we try to be a band who's spontaneous in all aspects. You know. But when it comes to track listing, it's not that we're trying to be calculated about anything, but it's just the flow. You know, we want Shane will be like, no, we do this track, and I'll be like, no, that fucking no, we go, you know, this track, you know. So it turns into a bit of a process. You know?
I think it's very important. I mean, for me, I'm the kind of guy, I don't like to listen to singles. I really like to listen to the album in sequence. So for me, it's important that the track listing works, because I want to have that journey of going through every single song and feeling connected, and not disconnect from the album throughout that path. If you're listening to a song here and there, is a different story. But if you're listening to the album, there has to be a fluidity to it.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, you know, I think it worked. It worked out pretty well, you know. So it could have been a lot different, but you know, it wasn't in the end. So.
And you mentioned some of the influences in mixing things on this album. That was one of the things I wanted to ask you, because listening to this record, I could pinpoint, not song per song, but within the songs themselves, a little bit of the history of Napalm Death from the first demo all the way to now. Do you really feel like this album almost feels like a greatest hits without being a greatest hits, really encapsulating the history of the band?
Yeah, you know what, Pedro, it was never. It's interesting to you give that like kind of perspective, you know, but it was never planned that way. Our only concern, apart from the things, the kind of loose rules I told you about the extremity stuff, our only concern whenever we do an album is to just put the best songs on there. You know, it really is that way. You know, we never pay consideration to like, oh, you know, well, we should make it like maybe a mix of just for argument's sake, utilitarian and fear, emptiness, despair, for example. We'll never do that. You know, it's just what we've got at the time, obviously what we're feeling at the time, musically, sonically speaking, obviously what I'm feeling with the lyrics, which I explained. It's just literally that. It's that simple. You know, there's definitely no sort of looking backwards to see where we can combine two different things. I would suggest, you know.
So it's more like we said earlier on, it was more of an organic process.
Absolutely organic. Absolutely organic, you know. So
I have to ask you about two of my favorite tracks on the album, and I want to start with Fuck the Factoid. I thought, first of all, great opening track. It kind of merges everything that the album is going to offer to the listener. From a lyrical perspective, you get a glimpse to what's coming next. Mm-hmm. But from a musical perspective, that track kind of incorporates every single thing that this album is about. Great bass. There's a killer bass line on that track that it was delicious. Like I was just like, I was like vibing to it. It's like, this is like old school Napalm Death.
Yeah.
But the song just really represents well the album, and I love the lyrics on that song, because I kind of feel like we live in a world where facts don't really matter anymore. It's kind of weird.
Yeah. So, it's about the inflation of small points that are never a true picture of what's of the full story, you know. And of course, if you do that, you run the risk of not only portraying things in a way that's inaccurate, but the consequences of that in terms of the people we were talking about, you know, the in the album can be disastrous, you know, for them, because, you know, talk about refugees. This stigma about the whole thing about refugees is propped up by like factoids being like smushed together and not really a true representation of anything, you know. So
yeah, it's like statistics. You can always manage to move them in order to fit your own narrative.
The narrative.
It's not. You're not necessarily lying about it, but you're just taking a small portion of the truth, and then matching that small portion of the truth, not the big picture, the small portion, into what you want to say.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, I'm totally into like abstractism and stuff like that. You know, I'm way into that stuff, but this is a different context. You know what I mean? This is about people's lives, you know, so it's important that things are looked at accurately, you know. And
the other song I want to ask you about was Invigorating Clutch.
Yeah,
that to me was a very interesting track. It almost felt like a black metal track.
Where that comes from is stylistically, it's like a mix between Amoebics. Do you know the band Amoebics?
Yeah.
The punk. So that intro is very Amoebics for us, and then when it kicks in, it's also very Amoebics, straight into like the really grunty fucking guitars, you know.
Yeah.
But to be honest, mate, the two riffs that are in that are, to me, Celtic Frost or Hellhammer, whichever way you want to slice it, and Slaughter, Canadian Slaughter. You know, that's what they are. As soon as I heard it, I was like, "Yep, I know where this is going." You know, so
yeah, it's a song that really stands out from the rest of the album. I don't feel like there's any other song that even comes close to how this track sounds. Even your vocals on this track are different, have a different approach that really match the overall mood and atmosphere that the music is creating.
It's very lumbering track, you know. It's purposefully lumbering, you know, like taking it's glacial almost. The you know.
I call it slow burning.
Yeah, exactly. Slow burning. That's another good phrase. Yeah.
It has that appeal to it, but this just shows how versatile this record really is. This song is like, when you look at the two songs that I just mentioned, Fuck the Factoid and this one, I mean, they're in polar opposites.
Poles apart. Yeah.
Do you have any outstanding track or favorite track on this record for you that really stands out?
You know what, Pedro? Here's the thing. I'd need a little bit of time first, really, to kind of get a favorite. It's hard for me to pick because it's strong. I feel that it's strong, you know. So for me, I would say I could pick out a few. You know, I would actually say Backlash, just because. Invigorating Clutch, the title track, actually, Throes, which is fucking, it's batshit crazy, that one, you know. And probably the last track as well, A Belly Full of Salt and Spleen, you know, that one, because it's so like experimental, you know. Even compared to what we've done previously, it's very experimental, you know. So
I feel like I know the answer to this question, but I have to ask you anyways. I mean, 16 albums under your belt. You guys, you know, you guys are icons when it comes to the metal world, at least in my eyes.
Yeah.
You may not feel that way. I feel that way because I told you before we started, the first ever metal shirt that I owned was a Napalm Death Utopia Banished t-shirt. So I feel like I have a connection with the band from early on. What keeps driving you guys to put out incredible record after incredible record?
There's an important one word I want to pick up on in there, which you said, Pedro, which I feel is part of the longevity of the band, aside from the fact that we're still enthusiastic, you know, that we can write, that we feel that we can write interesting albums and play gigs like our lives depended on it. You know, you should be able to do that, you know, I think. But the third thing is that you get a different answer depending on who you speak to in the band. But for me, the metal tag is too narrow. You know, it doesn't represent. It's not a full representation of Napalm Death. You know, metal is definitely in the sound, 100%. You know, for sure. But equally, hardcore punk. You know, equally all the other post-punk and whatever else influences. So that Napalm still get called a metal band puzzles me sometimes, you know, because we feel, you know, we like metal, of course we do, but we don't feel like shoved into just that narrow category, you know what I mean? We feel a lot, we breathe, you know, a lot wider than that, you know. We just, you know, the whole way we operate is a lot wider than that tag would suggest, you know. So I think that's helped us, because the diversity of the sound of the band, the ideas and how they're employed, makes us much more than a metal band. And I'm not being like sniffy about metal at all. You know, that's not the point. I'm just saying that the Napalm universe is much wider than that. You know, and I think it's actually helped us, you know, in terms of the longevity, because we can hit a lot of points, you know, of different scenes, you know, where people appreciate the band, you know. So.
Yeah, having a much wider audience than just if you're just stuck to one single genre, and every single album sounds almost like a photocopy of each other.
Yeah, for sure, you know. So.
One more question for you before I let you go, and that is, considering once again the history of the band, 16 records, where does this one stand for you? I know it's the new baby.
Yeah.
And it's perhaps a cliche kind of question, but I have to ask you, looking back, looking at this one, looking at everything you've done, where does this one stack up?
Tricky, Pedro, very tricky. Yeah, I mean, I put it like this, I can only say this at this point. When Apex came out, and still now, I consider that it would be in my top albums, of what we've done. And I think this new one is almost the conjoined twin of Apex. You know what I mean? So if you take, like, for me, when I wasn't in the band, because they're still milestones for me, whether I'm in the band or not, was Scum, From Enslavement. I would say Utopia Banished. I would say after that, probably Enemy of the Music Business, and then I would say probably The Code is Red, and then I would say Apex Predator, and then I would say maybe the new one, because I feel that Apex and this new one are quite closely, they're almost like a Rubik's Cube, you could like mix them up and they'd be
almost like part one and part two.
Kind of, to me at least,
Yeah, from my perspective as well, I kind of had that feeling like this really, even though it comes 5 years apart, it doesn't feel like it's coming 5 years apart. It really feels like what you had to say in the previous record, this one really picks up where the last sentence was said. This picks up the conversation in the right same spot.
Sure. I think so. Yeah, I would agree with that assessment. Yeah.
Perfect. Well, I want to thank you very much for your time today. It was an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, man, no problem. Anytime, man, anytime.
Just absolutely a pleasure. I love the album. I'm really glad that I had a chance to obviously check out the record and chat with you about it. It's always a pleasure and an honor.
Yeah, thank you, Pedro.
No, thank you. And stay safe and stay healthy. And hopefully this thing is over soon and we get to see you guys on the road.
No problem. Take care, my friend.
Take care.
All the best to you. Cheers, man.